I'm Rabbi Jonathan Kupitz. I'm the rabbi here at Temple Beth Israel. So I really just want to welcome you to this space, to this place. I think at this time with all that's going on in the world, it's good just to be together and to be with one another and to be in community. So I'm so happy that you are here and that we're able to host this wonderful book festival event. I'm not going to say anything about the event itself. I'm going to pass it on to Andrea Tarr to share about the book festival and our event today. And so, Andrea.
Thank you and good evening to everyone. Welcome to the 25th Annual Book Festival of the Jewish Federation of San Gabriel and Pomona Valleys. Before we begin, I'd like you to be aware of the exit signs in case of emergency. And if you haven't already done so, please silence your cell phones. I'm Andrea Tarr, and I'm co-hosting this event with Shelley Klein. Shelley and I have many people to thank. First of all, a big thank you to Temple Beth Israel and Rabbi Kupitz. Thank you to Cantor Paul, to Barry Weisband, and to Juan, who helps us set up for this event. We'd like to give a big thank you to Candy Fisher and her culinary crew, and to our dedicated committee members. A big thank you to you, to our advanced readers, and to Rebecca Russell, our coordinator. We'd like to thank the Jewish Book Council in New York, from where we select our titles. Thank you to our behind-the-scene tech wizard, Jake Taville, and our on-site tech wizard, Dawn Pollack. Thank you to our literary circle, whose financial support makes these festival events possible. And as our Jewish Book Festival celebrates its 25th year, our Jewish Federation is also celebrating a milestone. This year marks 30 years for the marks 30 years for the PJ Library, our cultural arts program, and many other events for the Jewish voice, serving the Jewish voice for this community. To mark this achievement, we've planned some very special anniversary programs throughout the year, including our 30th anniversary celebration brunch, Sunday, June 23rd, where we will be honoring our past presidents, saluting our first 30 years, and looking forward to the next 30 years. Okay, before our presentation begins, those audience members who are on Zoom, you'll be able to type your questions in the Q&A tab at any time, and after the presentation, our authors will address these questions. Tonight's program is a presentation by two authors. We have Helene Stapinski and Bonnie Siegler. Now, please remember that the authors will be glad to sign a copy of their book after the program in the social hall where our reception will be held. The American Way presents a kaleidoscopic view of mid-century America. The authors will offer an intriguing intersection of family histories. We'll get a look at the magic of movies, the birth of the Man of Steel, the rise of Marilyn Monroe, and daring European refugee escapes. American Way may have many meanings in addition to it being the meaning of the American dream. Helene Stapinski began her writing career for her hometown newspaper. Her articles have since appeared in many publications, including People Magazine, New York Times, New York Magazine, and Helene teaches journalism at NYU and is the author of 3 best-selling memoirs. She lives in Brooklyn with her family. Bonnie Siegler has taught at Yale in the School of Visual Arts. She's written 2 books and is the founder of an award-winning graphic design studio. Bonnie's grandfather was the link to the iconic Marilyn Monroe photo you're likely familiar with. And also, the cover of the book, The American Way, was designed by Bonnie. Please give a warm welcome to our guests, Helene and Bonnie.
We're sharing. Hi, everybody. I'm Helene. I'm Bonnie. I think we're gonna start, should we start with some slides?
Yeah, I think so. As she mentioned, it's the story of my grandfather. It's three stories that kind of intertwine. The story of my grandfather, who is in the upper right corner there with my mom and my grandmother. So he escaped Germany with the help of the publisher of Superman, who was someone he did not know. This is
So we're gonna get to
1938.
him.
We'll get to him.
Want to go to the next slide?
Sure, we can go.
To see your grandfather? Yeah, there he is.
So this is him. And he's the definition of mensch. He was an amazing guy. And he was a furrier, not a filmmaker. But one night, he took a 16mm camera out on the streets of New York. And next slide, please. And just happened to film Marilyn Monroe while she was shooting the famous 7-Year Itch scene. And I found the film in his apartment when he was moving. It was crazy because he'd always talked about it, but I didn't, I kind of thought it existed, but maybe it didn't exist anymore. But I found the loose film. It was crazy. So this is a slide of that. And then a few other slides of Marilyn, if you go forward. So he was really standing close to her, This shot, we think there was a moment that night when Joe DiMaggio left the scene very
He was
angrily.
very mad because her dress was blowing up and all the men were yelling things at her and he was very jealous and angry and he left. And this is when he was leaving. We think she looked to the side. So,
Sad. This is sad, Marilyn.
sad Marilyn.
That's how it's labeled. The next slide is Billy Wilder, who was also a Jewish refugee from Germany, just walking in front of the camera. Next.
His story is in the book as well. You see Billy Wilder's arc throughout the book.
This is my favorite photo because it's so Venus on the half shell, it's just so beautiful. Okay, next, please. So my grandparents, they were 25 when they left Germany, but before that, in the 30s, the early 30s, they had this fantastic life there. They were part of this huge, thriving Jewish community. They were really happy, really successful furriers. Next slide, please. This is them at their wedding. Next. So my grandfather came to America in 1938 to get a sponsor, and then he had to go back to Germany to get my grandmother and my mother, which is an insane part of the story we'll get to. But this is his cousin who he didn't know, who happened to live in New York, and she happened to live next door to Harry Donenfeld in the Bronx, who was the founder of Superman. So it was just all these crazy connections. She knew him before he was wealthy or famous or anything. And she went to him and asked to sign for her relatives in
They were
Germany.
strangers to him. He didn't know them, but he signed for them, for Bonnie's family.
Next, that's the guy.
That's Harry Donenfeld. He's got very big lapels, as you can see. Yeah, this is the 40s. He was before he became the publisher of Superman, he was a printer, and because he had trucks in the 20s with paper, big rolls of paper coming back and forth, the mob asked him to move the bootlegging booze back and forth. So he was a bootlegger. So his first
he
fortune
wasn't
came-
in the mob.
He was not.
He was mob adjacent.
mob adjacent. But as you can see, he liked to.
He
think
dressed like
he
it.
dressed like it. But he also became he wasn't just a bootlegger, but he published these things called smooshes, which were sort of, we don't want to call them porn. They were
They were
girly magazines,
like
magazines.
dirty drawings. I mean, and they were against the law,
But they were illegal.
especially to send them across state lines, which he did many times and was arrested.
And mailed them too. He mailed them, which was against the law as well. And so he went to jail. Well, didn't go to jail, but he was arrested 3 times.
He got someone else to go to jail for him. That's the
Yeah.
truth.
And then he finally turned to the comics, which was just happening at the time. It was just starting, in the 30s, in the early 30s. And his partner, Jack Leibowitz, who was originally his accountant, saw that the comics were coming up, and he said, "Why don't we do this? It looks like it's going to happen." And so
they went and stole a company from someone else, as one does, and started Superman. And they published Superman. The first issue came out in April 1938. Which was the same time he signed for my family.
her grandfather arrived that same week, basically, that Superman came out, which we didn't know about until we started researching the book, but it's all happening at the same time.
We didn't know any of
coincidence
this.
of it all,
Yeah.
it's just beautiful.
The next slide is of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who were the teenagers who created Superman originally, these two poor Jewish boys, and Harry
Cleveland.
from Cleveland, and Harry and Jack basically paid them $130 for the rights to Superman forever.
Yeah.
So Harry screwed over these guys, but rescued my family.
He was a complicated guy.
This is just a funny artifact. It's their first attempt at a magazine. It was just typed and stapled. I love that they did this. Next is an early drawing by Joe Shuster. It says one and the same. Isn't that incredible? I mean, that was really the miracle of Superman. That was the thing.
Clark Kent.
The next photo is Harry Donenfeld's wife, Gussie, with George Reeves. I just love that photo. Next, these are my great-grandparents who play a part in the book because I knew they died in the Holocaust, but I had no idea what happened to them. Nobody in my family did. And in doing research for the book, we discovered what happened to them, which was really incredible to, dig up that kind of history after 60 years.
Yeah, and that part of the book, we basically used Marilyn Monroe and Superman to draw people into the book, but the very heart of the book, the very middle, is the Holocaust, and they're
a big
there
part
to
of
tell,
it.
to tell the story of what happened to the people who didn't get out of Berlin, who didn't leave.
But, and I know this sounds like an oxymoron, but it's an uplifting Holocaust book. I'm sorry, it's true. Next slide is how we found out what happened to my great-grandparents, which was the Germans kept really good records. They didn't destroy a lot of them.
Yeah, they thought they were going to win, obviously.
So I've got all the paperwork, which trains they were on, when they were on them, and where they went. And they ended up in Molly Trostanek, which was a camp I never heard of. Oh, another thing I learned. Does anyone know how many camps there were? Any idea?
Camps and ghettos, not
I
just
mean,
camps.
yeah, camps and ghettos, all the different kinds of camps. I sort of would have guessed 400, 500 with the pre-research knowledge, 40,000.
Yeah.
Yep. 40,000. The next slide is, so Harry was friends with the Roosevelts, partially because he made comic books for the military during the war because the soldiers weren't reading the manuals. So he asked them to put them in comic books, which Harry did. So he became friends with the Roosevelts because he did that for them.
Want me to pick up this?
Yep.
Okay. So in writing the book, we knew the connection, obviously, between Jules and Marilyn, because he was there the night that her dress blew up, right? We knew the connection between Jules and Harry because Harry sponsored him to come from Berlin, but we didn't know the connection between Marilyn and Harry. But I figured there had to be one, so we just kept reading and kept digging and digging and doing research. And one day I'm reading one of the dozens of biographies of Marilyn that we read. And at the very back of the book, there's a picture of her from 1946 covered just in the covers
Next picture.
of the magazines. Yeah, go to the next one. That she was on the cover of that year. She was on the cover of 33 magazines that year. She started out as a model, right? Before she was a movie star. And so when I saw the picture of these magazines on her body, by then I knew enough about Harry, about a year into the research, to know that most of these magazines were Harry's magazines. So she's covered in Harry's magazines. And the one before, Laugh magazine, was one of his main magazines. It was a ridiculous, stupid, I don't even know what you'd call it, a humor magazine,
Yeah.
sort of, but it had always had a pretty girl on the cover. And she was on the cover many times of that magazine. So we found that connection between them.
So the next is, so this is a few pieces of the film that my grandfather shot. So in 7 Year Itch, there were two scenes that were filmed basically on his block. One is outside. Has anyone seen this terrible movie, The 7 Year Itch? So one is outside the townhouse, and my grandfather was there, as you'll see. And then the other one was on another street, and that's the subway grate scene. So if you just click on it again, it should play. But you
That's
see
his
how
footage.
close he was standing to her?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Just a little taste.
Okay.
And then,
Is there another?
oh, there's
that's
just the back of the book.
Yeah. You got the front and the back. So should we tell them how we met each other and how this all started?
Sure. Well, it had two beginnings, because when I first found the film, that was incredible. That was in like 2005. And we showed it at like an outdoor film festival once, and then we just put it in a drawer and forgot about it. And then in 2016, when the world started to change and there was so much hate and anger and words I'd never heard before, I thought, well, we need to start talking about how much this is like 1933 when things started to, we need to talk about this, you guys. I'm screaming to, into the air. So I thought, I know, I have this great footage of Marilyn, and my grandfather has an amazing story. We'll put them together and get an article in the New York Times about the Holocaust while this is all happening. So I asked my agent if she knew anyone who might be interested in helping me.
And that's where I came in. So her agent was my agent. We had never met. And she said, I know this woman, Bonnie. She's got this great story. I think you guys should get together. And so we did. We had lunch, and she brought her phone with the footage on it, what you just saw, but 3 minutes of it. And, kind of blew my mind with that. I said, oh my God, that's amazing. But then she told me the story of her grandfather's escape from Germany, which is an incredible story. And that's really the through line of this book, is his story. He's the main character. And so when she told me his story, that's when the light bulb went off. And I said, yeah, I'm going to pitch this to the Times. And I did. I write regularly for the New York Times. And so I interviewed Bonnie about a dozen times, and, she talked to the photo people at the time. She gave them that footage that you just saw. And so it ran. It was around Inauguration Day, right?
Yep.
In 2017. And the story went viral. It was one of those stories that just kind of went around the planet and back again. And before I wrote the story, she had heard rumors of Harry Donenfeld, the Superman publisher, sponsoring her grandfather, but she didn't really know many details. She wasn't sure if it was even true. We didn't even know who Harry was. And I said, well, why don't we just I'll just write about your grandfather and Marilyn. That's enough. It's going to be too many words anyway for a Time story, so we'll just go with that. So then after the story ran, she found out more information about Harry and about him sponsoring them. And
Actually, because it ran in the Times, and some relatives that I didn't really know contacted me and told me what they had, which was from Harry's son's wedding. They had a program, the menu from the wedding. It's a picture is in the book, actually. And Jerry, Joe, and Harry were all there. And he drew Superman on the menu for their son, and they all signed it. So I was like, okay, this is
like
good. We're getting somewhere.
The missing link. But then she found stories from other people who were still alive in the family, because people come out of the woodwork when you write a story for the Times. It's sort of like this beacon, And so she called me one day and said, do you want to write a book about my grandfather? This was 2 years after the story ran. And I said, yeah, because I knew it was a great story as it was, even without Superman.
And then add Harry and Superman.
Yeah. And it was, but of course, this was right before the pandemic, right? So this was like the December before the pandemic, not knowing what was coming, right? We start writing a proposal for the book. We send it to the agent. The pandemic hits. They sell the book right after the pandemic. That summer they sold it, but we wrote the book during the pandemic. So the 2 years of the pandemic was when we wrote it, pretty much.
We talked on the phone 100 times a day.
So we should have had walkie-talkies, we talked so much.
Dixie cup.
Right. And Bonnie did, I'd say, the bulk of the research. I mean, she did all of the family research. She was dealing with Yad Vashem and the Museum of Jewish Heritage, the Holocaust Museum in DC. They were amazing. They're the ones who found out about her great-grandparents and sent her that information.
But I would read a book and literally write a book report and send it to Helene.
And she just kept throwing stuff my way. And at one point I was like, Bonnie, stop. You just, it's too much. I can't absorb it all.
There were so many amazing stories, as you'll see in the book. I mean, it was really hard to edit it down.
So anyway, so she would shovel it my way. But most of the research we did was just, interviewing people on Zoom and talking to people on the phone. With the Superman information, we found out that there was an archive of all the Superman material at Columbia University. And I had gone to Columbia, and normally I would have been able to just walk in there and access it. But with the pandemic, no one was allowed into the library. So we had to talk to the librarian on Zoom. She had to show us each piece of paper.
Literally.
Of thousands.
And we would say, yes, we want a Xerox of that.
you know, so it was quite a challenge writing it during the pandemic, but it took up our pandemic time, which was terrific and made us, you know, busy. Which was
The
good.
other thing was Showa tapes. A lot of
Yes.
my relatives had recorded tapes. So the ones who had passed, it was better than an interview. We had 2 hours alone with them telling us their whole story. It was, and you know, my Aunt Ushi had told us a story. We had heard about some woman, she brought a bottle of bourbon to
Cognac. I think.
cognac to bribe someone with, and she was on the train and she jumped out the train window and escaped, like amazing stories. And we found her Showa tape. Like, so all these people who had passed, we were able to still meet them and hear from them directly, which was incredible.
And you know, when you research something like this, you've got all these little bits of information, but then it all starts to jigsaw together, you know, and you see the actual story and it fits, you know, it's like, oh, right, it's a puzzle piece, you know, and it all just came together. And it was just a great collaboration. We've got along really well. We had no fights.
Really lucky. We were really lucky.
Because we could have hated each other. Although I guess we wouldn't have done it if we hated each
We
other.
wouldn't know.
We wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
But the one great part was Bonnie kept pushing for us to go to Berlin, but of course everything was closed during the pandemic. You couldn't go anywhere, but she kept checking every day to see when it was going to open, when Berlin was going to open. And the day that you were able to go to Berlin, Bonnie called me and says, let's go.
We're going.
We're going to Berlin. And so we went and we took her son with us.
And we got to see, I had all the addresses of everything. So there were a few first stores that were in my family in Berlin. We got to go to like the addresses thinking it might not be there. Every single place was still there. And if you've been to Berlin, you know how unusual that is because so much was destroyed.
It would be new house, old house that Jules lived in, new house, you know, so it was kind of a miracle that they were all standing. And it was not just the first shops, but the apartments, just all the places that he had mentioned to her growing up. And we also went to the Wannsee Villa. Jules had gone to the beach right across from the Wannsee Villa in his 20s.
You know, it's on a lake and the villa is beautiful. And across the lake, you can see all the cabanas and the little tents, and it's a beautiful beach. It's a beautiful area.
And so we went to see where he had gone to the beach, but of course then went to the Wannsee Villa and lived that horror, you know. So that's at the beginning of the book. That's one of the first chapters. We talk about that. But yeah, Berlin was chilling in a lot of ways, but research wise, really
it was
amazing.
incredible.
It was sort of the missing link for the book because, you know, I didn't know Berlin. I had never been there, and I had a map, but once I went, the map came alive for me, and I was able to bring all those scenes to life in Berlin, because a lot of the book takes place in Berlin. You know, the first half, pretty much, the first third, I guess, before he gets out. Yeah.
So we didn't know in my family that about Harry. I mean, my grandfather, I was like 40 when my grandfather passed, so I knew him really well, but he only told good stories. So I never heard bad stories. So you'll see in the book, it's all the amazing escapes and, you know, just misses and things like that. He only told good stories. But he didn't ever tell us about Harry, which I can only imagine today was because of the mob adjacent thing, maybe. But why he didn't want to name his hero, I don't know if I'll ever know. Everyone else in the family knew, but he never told us.
One of the theories is that Harry, you know, didn't want everybody showing up on his doorstep, you know, to get their relatives over. If I know Harry, and I feel like I know Harry at this point, that was the reason. You know, he told them not to say anything.
But he also, if any Jewish neighbor came to him looking for a job, my kid needs work, he'd hire them. He was, you know, the comics industry was invented by Jews who couldn't work in the main publishing industry. So they were all Jewish, and Harry took care of his own, and he created a foundation just for Jewish causes. He was a mensch in addition to, you know, all the other stuff.
Yeah, but you know, we found his family, and at first we were worried they wouldn't want to talk to us because of his background and stuff, you know, but they were thrilled to talk to us because only the bad stories were out there about Harry, the bootlegging and the girly magazines and things like that. And he was kind of a little bit of an alcoholic, so there's some bad stories
and a
there.
liar
And a lawyer and
oh
a cheat.
His grandson told us he had a wife, a mistress, and a girlfriend, and cheated on all three. Those are their family stories.
That's Harry, yeah. But when they found out what the book was about, that he saved her family, you know, they were thrilled.
They
and
had
they all
no
talked to
idea.
us, and they totally opened everything up to us. They showed us old photos and
Yeah, that's how we have
invited us
that
to their
Gussie
house.
picture.
Yeah, yeah, just great stuff. And they were terrific. His grandchildren are in
And-
their 60s and 70s.
Totally weirdly, I moved a few years ago to a small town in Connecticut, and just out of the blue, Harry's son Erwin. So you know, it's DC Comics. That's what Harry started. DC Comics, and DC Comics. If you go to their website, you will never see Harry Donenfeld's name. They've completely pretended he doesn't exist anymore. So his family was kind of hoping, if he's like an American Schindler, maybe we'll be back in the game, you know? We don't know if he saved anyone else. But after he and his son were fired from DC, his son moved his whole family to Connecticut, to my town, and raised his kids. So Harry Donenfeld's grandkids went to the same high school my kids went to, which is just an insane coincidence.
Yeah, there were all
mean-
kinds of weird, crazy coincidences, you know, with the book. So, and that's what makes it sort of magical, and it all kinds of fits together, you know, like I said, it kind of jigsaws together. And the big challenge for me as a writer was to take those three strands, this escape from Nazi Germany, Superman, and Marilyn Monroe, and tie them together for you. And I have to say, I did it. So, and that is the glory of my project. You know, she did the research, but I tied it all together. So, I think, did we tell the whole story? Do we want to tell any of the escape stories, or we want to leave that for?
You want to hear an escape story? Okay, so one of the best ones is so he had to come to America, and then he had to go back to Germany, and this is 1938.
Right.
So he gets there, and he has his sponsor and everything, and he gets to Germany, and the guards are there go, "You're a Jew. We don't want Jews here. You have to go back the other way. You can't come back into Germany. Don't you know what's happening?" And he said, "You don't understand." I mean, he was 25. He said, "You don't understand. I'm Clark Gable's agent. And if I don't get into Germany, his next movie won't be shown in Germany." And he knew Hitler loved Clark Gable. So the guards consulted among themselves and let him in. And then he got my mother and my grandmother. Oh, there's another story there.
The Gestapo story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they, you know, like I said, they had a great life. And there was this guy in their building who he was friends with, the way you are with the neighbor. And this guy came to him one night and said, "You got to get out of here. You got to get out of here now." And he's in his Gestapo uniform, by the way. "You got to get out of here." And like, I mean, now. So my grandfather packed up and they left immediately. The next day was Kristallnacht. But the amazing thing is, to me, which I keep thinking about with what's going on today, he was a Jew, just like the Jews that the Gestapo was killing, but because he knew him personally, he was different somehow. So he was okay. All the other nameless people were not okay. But just if he didn't make that distinction, you know, we wouldn't be here today.
But we didn't even know that story. She knew that they had left right before the night before Kristallnacht, and you could figure it out from the ship records and things like that. You could see when they left. But we thought it was just a coincidence, you know. Oh my God,
Lucky.
how lucky he was to leave the day before Kristallnacht. And then one of the many, many times we interviewed her mother and father, we were talking to them about it, and they're like, "Oh, well, no, there was that Gestapo guy who lived in the building." We're like, "What Gestapo guy?" You know, so another link, you know, to what it was all about.
Yeah, it
So
was crazy.
it all just jigsawed together again. And
But like
so-
every survivor story is a miracle. I mean, every single person who made it is a miracle in their own unique way.
Yeah.
But
he settled on the Upper East Side, and that's where he met Marilyn. So, and I think that's that. That's
you
it.
want to, yeah, do you want to, should we read a little from the book? You want to start?
Can you do the beginning?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the first chapter. Okay. This is from the prologue. Jules Schulbach left his third-floor apartment around midnight and stepped onto the sidewalk at Lexington and 61st Street in Manhattan, carrying what looked like a black lunchbox with chrome around the edges. He surveyed the familiar view, glancing at an upstairs window across the street that belonged strangely to a doll hospital. Its lights and red neon crosses had been turned off for the evening, hiding the buckets of miniature heads and arms and various doll parts that would spook visitors when they peeked from his apartment window in the daylight. But Jules found the doll hospital mildly amusing, as he did most things. He panned his gaze a few doors down and crossed the avenue to his fur shop. Its treasures were locked up for the night. Jules inspected the darkened window, as he always did when passing by, partly to admire his display, frozen mannequins posed in the latest minks and fox stoles, but also to check that everything was all right in his absence, and it was. Since it was a Tuesday night, the streets of Manhattan were mostly deserted. Jules's shadow, one of the only ones cast by dim street lamps and a moon that was just half past full. The Chrysler Building loomed in the distance, only a few of its offices lit, the bright moon reflecting off the spiked metal helmet of its tower. The temperature was in the 50s, chilly for early fall. In Jules's version of the story, a story he would retell again and again over the decades, a few checker cabs flew by, a few crawled looking for a fare, but Jules walked 2 blocks, then 3, past shuttered drugstores and dry cleaners, past silent newsstands and grocery stores, past a single bored cop on the beat to whom he gave a respectful nod but did not stop to chat up. Jules loved to chat and loved to spin a good story, but tonight he was a man with a mission, not just an insomniac out on a late night stroll in the greatest city in the world. He did not have an American dream. He was already living it, right now, right here on these streets. As he grew closer to his destination, East 51st Street, Jules sensed a strange charge in the atmosphere, as if the molecules were being rearranged somehow, and a distant hum, even before he saw the crowd. He passed the all-night coffee shop with its pink neon and the onion-shaped green copper domes of the Central Synagogue on the corner of 55th Street, so much like the one he had left behind in Berlin. And sure enough, 3 blocks away, he could see it, the bright glow up ahead. As he drew nearer, the lights were brighter than daylight, the crowd deeper than those on the 42nd Street subway platform during the evening rush. His heart beating faster with each step, Jules realized there was something strange about this crowd. He couldn't identify it right away. It took a few beats, but then it hit him. There were only men here, their families and wives tucked safely into bed back in their apartments. Like Yankee Stadium under the floodlights, men in hats and jackets and a smattering of ties stood around, excited for the game to begin. Some stood on fire escapes and the roofs of cars, perched on lampposts and atop traffic lights, all trying to find a good spot to glimpse the coming attraction, the American dream made flesh, with all its promises and curves. One of the Yankees was even here, Joe DiMaggio, shaking hands and working the growing crowd of photographers and cops, loiterers and fans. Jules dove straight in. He'd never been a timid man. If he had, he wouldn't be here walking the earth. Gently pushing his way through the crowd, using his free hand and a few German accented pardon me's and excuse me's, he was a gentleman after all. He got as close as he could to the commotion. There was the gaffer he had met yesterday who tipped him off about tonight. They nodded in recognition. Then the movie director flitted past in his fedora, nervously eyeing the growing throng. His name was Billy Wilder. They were both from Berlin, Jules knew. Both escaped Jewish refugees. He caught Wilder's eye and held it for a moment, long enough to think that maybe Billy, too, knew what they had in common, as if Jules was marked somehow with invisible ink that only the fellow wounded could detect. Billy walked past, and Jules was suddenly reminded of his purpose here tonight. He squeezed the black box between his legs, screwed around with a few knobs, wound a small crank, knelt down into a narrow free space between bodies, and then placed the box up to his right eye, his Bolex 16mm camera. It was September 15th, 1954, and it was no accident he was here. Jules was a thoughtful man who had always planned everything very carefully. Befriending that gaffer was just one of many steps that brought this furrier and amateur filmmaker to the front row of one of the most iconic moments in 20th century film history, one that he and he alone would save for posterity in living, moving color. Jules looked around the artificially lit New York street corner. Always so much life, so much to capture, He had tasted the bitterness of life, but this was the sweet part. He peeked through the lens of his Bolex, focused on Billy Wilder and the crew in front of him, and suddenly, as if she knew he was coming, out stepped Marilyn Monroe. And action.
I'm just going to read a little from the end. But I also wanted to say he knew he had an incredible life. And when I started working in television, not PBS, but MTV, he said to me, "Oh, good, you work in TV now. You can make a movie about me."
So we're working on that.
I don't think you understand what MTV is. But he knew it was special, and he even named it. He wanted it to be called The Signature. So even though he never told us about Harry Donenfeld, that signature was his life. I mean, that was the most important thing that ever happened to him. Where am I going?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a description of the film itself, which weirdly he cut in. He was a really, good amateur filmmaker, and he cut in intertitles. And before the Marilyn footage starts, he cut in an intertitle like that you got out of a, amateur movie making magazine. It says "Our Baby." I don't know why. And suddenly there she is again, Marilyn, her full body in view from 5 feet away. It's the shot we've all been waiting for. The shot seen around the world, not in still, but in moving, living, luxuriously saturated Kodachrome. The lost footage of one of the most iconic moments in American film history. For a minute and a half, Marilyn moves and breathes and is alive again. Not on television or up on a wide screen, but in a home movie that hardly anyone has ever seen. The American dream in flesh and blood. She holds a red and white striped scarf in one hand and a white clutch in the other, and tries to hold down the famous white pleated dress. It billows up like a paratrooper's parachute, like those parachutes she sprayed and inspected so long ago at the radio plane factory just before she started modeling. Where? Oh, back when World War II was still raging, the concentration camps about to be discovered by the American and Russian GIs. Marilyn yawns, Marilyn smiles, Marilyn glows. Her skin is just like Billy Wilder described it decades ago. Flesh that photographs like flesh. You feel you can reach out and touch it, hold it, squeeze it. For a moment, the film crew crowds in and Jules shoots through a gap between their bodies. He captures only Marilyn's face, which looks off to the left, serious and unsmiling. DiMaggio is there in the crowd, though you can't see him, but Marilyn can, and she watches him walk away. Tom Yule comes into the shot and Marilyn pushes him into place. Wilder, dressed in his winter coat and fedora, moves in and out of the shot. Marilyn's dress flutters as she holds it down and chats with Yule, but it flutters up again and she laughs, throwing her head back. The dress flies clear up over her head, revealing the 2 pairs of white, silky underpants and the dark patch that they have failed to camouflage. The skirt hovers behind her like angel's wings, and for a second, it looks like she may just fly up, up and away, over the metropolis rooftops and the screaming, leering crowd that we cannot see or hear. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, Marilyn is gone. The dream is over. 3 seconds of black is followed by a single frame from a home movie. A middle-aged Schulbach relative strolls on green grass, a teenage boy behind her, both on a typical miraculous family outing. A family that, had it not been for Harry or Faye or America, would simply not exist.
We gave away the ending, but I think you knew where it was going.
Questions?
Yeah.
Comments? Anything?
Yeah, there's one right there. Yeah, do it, Mike, because they're doing Zoom, so. You got it.
There you go. Here's the question here.
How did you choose the title of the book?
Well, originally the Truth, Justice, and the American Way, that's Superman's tagline, but
it's like, it's really, we loved it because it was ironic. So it started there, but we meant it ironically because the American way, it's like my family got to come here and that's the American way. Other families were turned away and that's also the American way. So we meant it to cover all the different stories. Harry stealing companies from somebody is the American way too. And him becoming a success after basically growing up on the Lower East Side on a fire escape, also the American way.
And Marilyn making it, from nothing, being an orphan practically. That's the American way. But her dying the way she did is also the American way. So, it encompasses a lot, and it comes up again and again in the book. So,
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yes, you mentioned some of the Shoah footage of your relatives. Where was it stored? Was it here at the Shoah Foundation?
There
in LA,
was,
or
yeah, there was
where?
one, there were two at the Shoah Foundation and one in Adelson, which is at Yale. I think, I'm pronouncing, it might be, I can't remember the exact name. It's something like Adelson. But we just looked everywhere. We looked on every single place where anybody had anything. Yad Vashem has some too.
and I also filled in some blanks. There's one character in the book, one of her aunts, Golda, survived 4 concentration camps, came to America in 1947. And like we said, we wanted to tell his story of escape, but we wanted to show what happened if you didn't escape, and that was really important because the contrast, it doesn't mean as much if you're here, if you don't know what would happen if you weren't here, So
Golda did survive.
she
4
did, 4
camps, though.
concentration camp, came here. And so in trying to fill in, Golda wasn't alive anymore when we were writing the book. She had relatives who were alive and told us their stories, and we had a tape from her son. But I did research at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, tapes of people who were at the same camps at the exact same time that she was. And so from those testimonies was able to fill in some blanks on, the sights and sounds, if you will, of what she went through.
Another fan favorite that we haven't mentioned is
That's
my Aunt Ushi,
Oh, yeah.
who was, she hid out in Berlin. She didn't look so Jewish, so she was able to kind of pass. And she attached her Jewish star with snaps. So whenever she was passing, she would take it off. And whenever she had to be Jewish, she would put it back on. But she hid out all through Berlin in different places and carried her typewriter with her to every single place she went, even though it was against the law, and brought it to America with her. It was like her most precious possession.
She's a great character. She's my favorite, one of my favorite characters
I love
after
it.
Jules.
And the name, yeah. Was
Yeah,
she?
Ushi.
Ursula. Her
Ursula.
real name is Ursula, but we
Right.
called her,
Was she-
And Ushi.
well, we called her Aunt Ushi, but when we were little, we called her Aunt Tushy.
As you would.
Are there any?
Oh,
oth- Oh,
here's
here's
one.
a question.
Up here.
Here's a. Whoa. Wait.
Yeah.
Okay, so on a completely different subject, this is amazing. Thank you for sharing it. But then it said that you wrote 2 memoirs. So what were those about?
Three
3
memoirs.
memoirs. So what was,
The first book, well, they're all about, well, 2 of them are about my family. I ran out of material and that's why I wrote about her. And my whole family's mad at me. So, it was time to move on. But the first book is about my family in Jersey City. I had a lot of criminals in my family growing up in Jersey City. My grandfather tried to kill us when I was 5, which is the first chapter of the first book. He was a murderer in general. He just tried to kill us towards the end of his life. And then my
As one does.
as one does, but I thought everybody had a grandfather like that, obviously not. And then I had a great grandmother who was murdered by her husband, and just it goes on and on. I always like to say my family is like the Kennedys, but without the money. It was just one tragedy after another. And so I wrote a book about that. And it's not just about my family, but it's about the corruption of Jersey City. I don't know if anybody knows about Jersey City, but it was one of the most corrupt places in America. Frank Hague was the mayor. I am the law Hague. He was one of those Democrats who was very, very corrupt. Anyway, that was the first book. The second book was about playing drums in a rock band. So if they need a drummer, I'm ready. Let me know. I'm ready to play. And then the third book was about a murder in my family from the 1800s in Southern Italy. And so we'd heard rumors, sort of like, the rumors that they had heard in their family about Superman. We'd heard rumors that there had been a murder in Southern Italy, and my great-great-grandmother escaped to America. And so I spent 10 years trying to find that. And I did. I found a 600-page criminal file in Matera, which is in Basilicata on the Arch of the Boot. And the book is about me looking for the murder, but also finding the information. So it's alternating chapters. So it's me going and trying to look for it. And then as I find stuff, I give it to you and feed it to you slowly. So those are the 3 memoirs. But again, ran out of my own stories. So moved on.
Is there another question? Well,
Were there
no,
any on
okay,
Zoom
we're
or-
good. Nothing online. So thank you so
Okay.
much. You guys were amazing.
Thanks for having
We have a drawing for a bag of books. So if you could pick one of these pieces of paper out and read a name.
Patrick Mack.
Patrick Mack, you got a bag. of-
Congratulations.